Hi there and welcome to our Ubisoft press conference instant reaction show. I'm joined as ever, Tim Weaver.
Hello.
Dan Dawkins. I'm Tim Clark, fellow travellers through the night. It's starting to get late UK time. We've just seen Ubisoft. I have to say, hugely underwhelmed for much of it. Thought there was too much CG. An odd selection of games given kind of the slate they've got. We didn't really see much Watch Dogs, didn't really see that much Assassins, and then they just pulled it out of the bag at the last minute with Watch Dogs 2, otherwise known as the Division.
Yeah, I mean, I think that pretty much sums up the show for, well, I don't want to speak for Dan, but certainly off air, that seemed to be the vibe, that the Division would pull it out of the bag at the end, because otherwise it was a fairly, I don't want to say uninspiring, but it was.
You've just actually said uninspiring. You can't take it back now.
Okay, uninspiring conference. I mean, you know, they introduced their new game, The Crew, which we can maybe talk about a bit later. But otherwise, I thought it was fairly as expected.
Dan, what do you make of a game like The Crew? Because we'd gone from a position a few years ago where driving games weren't on their arse, but they felt like, from having been like a real mainstay of previous console eras to being pretty marginalised. You only really had the Elan driving games, as you described to me earlier, your Gran Turismos and your Forzas. But now we've got a real slew of kind of these open world games, like there's Need for Speed Rivals, and at the Ubi show, The Crew. There's another one that I've forgotten the name of. But how to explain the seeming resurgence? Is there actually a market out there for these games? Were you impressed?
I don't really like driving games, and probably haven't
the right man to answer this question.
Since Sega Rally, which is quite a long time ago. But I think what it is, because we're seeing tech that allows them to do things that were previously closed off. I think they're doing things because they can, as opposed to because they should. So we're looking at something like what was it called, The Crew. It looked a little bit like the more interesting bits were like Smuggler's Run on PS2, and obviously now the tech allows you relatively easily to be always online, blurring the boundaries between single player and multiplayer. Your friends race while you're not there, and all these sort of buzzwords feel like they're being recycled, and they were talked about in the EA conference definitely. And sort of the pitch of Need for Speed Rivals and The Crew felt broadly similar to what I've seen in previous years, where people have gone for the first time with blurring the boundaries between this, that, and the
studio is Ivory Tower, which I think is made up of a lot of the Test Drive.
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, with Test Drive Unlimited, they were pushing in that direction anyway, so it's a natural kind of evolution for those guys to have gone there. I just personally think that, and I'm sure you guys feel the same. That game, I was waiting for it to show me the next gen, and I know that in terms of what they're doing with that world, and it's not fidelity they're using the horsepower for, it's like scope and scale. But I still, that first bit where they showed the trailer, and I was thinking, if this is in game, wow, this looks amazing. And then it kind of cut to that shot of in game, and I was like, oh.
But this is the thing with the CG stuff. It's like a CG trailer now could equally have been a CG trailer from the previous era. It doesn't mean anything at all. So I sat there and I'd look at them to see what the concept was, and then just look away, because you can have terrible games with great CG trailers, or the
Dead Island.
Dead Island's a classic, not a terrible game, but certainly a game where there was a huge disconnect between what the trailer did and what the actual game did. And I thought it was interesting with the Division, because what stood out about it was it did have a level of kind of visual fidelity that made it seem like a real step on. But I also think by setting it in like a near future version of the real world and in a real city, I think that's partly why people responded so well to Watch Dogs last year, because people are bored of it either being Space Marines or far-flung war zones. So there's always been a huge element of GTA success, I think, the fact that it's anchored in metropolitan areas and suburbia and like things that people recognise from real life. So I think there's a real element with a game like The Division, which they did with Watch Dogs last year and they've repeated this year, where people are interested in playing what they know from real life. And we don't know war zones and we don't know Space Marines on the moon, but we do know metropolitan cities and suburbia and kind of, this whole surveillance thing, or with The Division, this kind of end of the world type stuff. It actually reminded me a lot of Last of Us is out and going to do well, you imagine now. There's this whole like end of the world vibe. I watched a show called Doomsday Preppers on National Geographic, and I think The Division was tapping nicely into that whole pandemic breakdown of society stuff that I think is quite topical, and I don't want to say cool, because the breakdown of society probably isn't cool, but
I mean, I said to Dan while we were chatting off air that what I wanted The Division to do above all else was, when it kicked off and it showed the kind of first sort of Not the bit where it's going like the future is going to be, and it showed you loads of it, but the bit where the actual in-game stuff started. I said what I wanted it to do when I was watching it is zoom straight into him and then the game to start, because that's what Watch Dogs did so well last year. Was it went, everyone was like, "Oh right, here we go, CGI intro," and then it went in and it was in-game.
Stripped away the bullshit.
And that's what it did, and that was why it was so impressive, because immediately it started and we were watching it and I was like, wow, now this looks like a next-gen game.
Dan, you really liked the UE, didn't you?
Yeah, I think like seeing the user interface was like super fresh, felt super nice and new. Didn't feel like some played out old trope that we'd seen. And like you said, it was in stark contrast to all the big bloated CG stuff we'd seen. Just to see, like Tim said, actual in-game straight away. And to see it off the bat, Tim and I both went, oh, looks amazing. And then when he got really into the shooty stuff outside the supermarket, you could see the car. And like you said, outside the police car, and even the little incidentals, like going past the car door, just popping it shut, just a nice little incidental. And then when you see him coming under fire, the way the bullet holes were appearing in the glass just felt like I can see each bullet. And it's just that level of realism that just takes it up a notch beyond what you've come to expect.
Are we giving them too much credit though? Because it is still fundamentally looks like a cover-based shooty thing with men firing guns at other ladies or men.
But we've seen that all night. I mean, we've seen that at every conference we've seen. It's just it is a lot of men shooting each other. But at least this did visually look like a next-gen game. Yeah. That's the one thing you can say about it.
And as much as we intellectualise these things, the truth was I looked at that and like almost most other games I've seen and went, damn, I want to play that. Yeah. That is a vision of what next-gen can be. Like that's taking me to graphics I haven't seen. It all felt fresh, and like exactly what you say about the setting is right. It just grounds it in your mind. You go, I know what this is now. I'm seeing it. Wow, can't wait to play it.
Well, let's call up next Games Master Editor Matthew Pellett and see if he feels the same way. So right now we're joined by Games Master Editor Matthew Pellett, who's just come out of the Ubisoft press conference in LA. He's literally standing on the street which will be very hard to get a cab from prior experience. Matt, what did you make of the Ubisoft show? Good, bad, indifferent?
It was alright. I mean, for the most part, I was just waiting for them to bring out their big hitters, to be honest. They obviously had two big announcements in the Crew and the Division. I don't know. Let's start with the Division, because that's one that I guess people are going to be talking about. It closed the show. It was very much their attempt at recreating the Watch Dogs hype from last year. I think it was pretty effective, actually. So it's a third-person, open-world, online... sorry, not open-world, third-person, online RPG. Looks very much like The Last of Us crossed with... Rainbow Six, I guess.
Were people coming out? Were you surprised it was a Clancy game that was kind of revealed right at the end?
To be honest, right at the start, I thought it was the repackaged Rainbow Six. You go back, was it 2.5, 3 years now since we saw the New York-based Rainbow Six and they were showing off. And just as they were teeing it up, they said it was one of their most loved franchises. At which point I thought, oh my god, they've completely redone Rainbow Six, rebooted it into that. So from that point of view, I'm not that surprised it was Tom Clancy. Having said that, it could have existed outside the Tom Clancy universe. It could have just been a new IP, something else to put in their belt to go alongside Assassin's Creed.
In terms of the rest of the show, I mean, a lot of the stuff to me seemed like it lent pretty heavily on either CG or really kind of a super edited gameplay footage to the point where it was hard to almost distinguish what it might look like in game.
Splinter Cell, for instance, and that just felt like an elongated trailer for a 24 season. You didn't really get a sense of what the game was. If you didn't know about Splinter Cell Blacklist already, I don't think that trailer really did a good job of selling it to you. Compared that with last year, when they actually had full 30 minutes of gameplay for E3 to watch. It was a weird one. I mean, I wouldn't say it was a bad show, because they had a lot of consistently good games there. No sign of the Prince of Persia. People were talking about will it, won't it. No sign of Beyond Good and Evil 2 still. Watch Dogs. I don't know, that CG trailer, that didn't compare with last year when they had gameplay footage that just knocked us at 6. So, I think there were a few misses, to be honest, this year.
Matt, if you had to score the conference out of 10, what would you give it?
6, maybe. I thought the Crew was a really interesting setup. I mean, that opening, the Crew trailer, it was like a Honda ad, like a real classic opening. And then you got into the gameplay, and I think what people need to realise about next gen is that there isn't necessarily going to be a huge boost in fidelity, like graphical fidelity. You're not going to see the leap that you saw last gen. It's more about what you can do with worlds, the size of worlds, the number of people or races any one time.
But do you think that's what people? Do you think that's what people want from the next gen? Like more people in a race? Is that enough?
Well, I don't think they've got an option because
this is what you're getting, and that's it.
Well, people don't have the manpower to develop games that look like real life, and can do things on the sort of scale that we're being shown now. Like, it's got to be one or the other. There is give or take. You can't have 5,000 people working 5 years on a game because it's just not financially viable. So yeah, the Crew was an interesting one. I'd like to know what the reaction is about that, because I think actually by the end of it I was sold on the proposition, but then it all comes down to the racing itself. Don't forget Codemasters had that game Fuel a few years ago that won the Guinness World Record for being the biggest world in a racing game, and it was pretty shat. So if the Crew is not a good racer at its heart, then all this stuff about driving around the entire USA, all these cities, it doesn't really count for much. So it'll be interesting to find out. One thing I would just say is I'm fed up today of having to play on my iPad or other tablets to add stuff to my game. I've lost count of the number of games today alone where tablet gameplay is adding stuff into titles. And, you know, at the Ubi show there, we had at least 2 or 3 games where that was prevalent.
Matt, I completely agree. I'm glad you've skewered the next gen dream on several different levels. We look forward to speaking to you over the course of the rest of the week.
Can I just say, I must say, thank you for standing in front of the most ostentatious Los Angeles sign I've ever seen. We're proving right now he's not sat in a bus stop just outside of Barnsley. He's in Los Angeles, people.
That's CJ. Thanks, Matt. See you later.
No worries. Cheers, guys.
Good stuff from Matt there. So he's clearly in agreement. The Division was definitely the standout. But other than that, amongst their, I don't want to say grab bag of other games, was there any stuff that stood out particularly as being good or bad?
I don't think they did the best job of representing what they had. I mean, they've got some strong games. Don't forget, I mean, Watch Dogs, everyone's very hyped about. Assassins, massive audience for it. Both those games they didn't represent very well. Now, it could be because they're going to show Watch Dogs in some bigger form at the Sony conference, which at this time of recording we haven't seen yet, so we don't know. But, you know, both of those I thought were disappointing showings for what could potentially be very big games for them. The rest of the stuff, I'll be honest, I can sort of take or leave.
Assassin's Creed, Dan, I mean, they had like some more sort of fey, slightly theoretically edgy, but not indie music soundtracking, slow motion kind of moodiness. It feels like, as cool as I'm sure that game will be, that they are still sort of running the same playbook with that as well. They know what works for it, they know what people respond to, and they kind of go, I don't want to say through the motions, but I feel like you want to see, it was crying out for like a quite detailed gameplay demonstration, which again, maybe Assassins will be at Sony also, and they'll double up, but I didn't feel like I came away from that Assassin's presentation knowing anything about the game that I didn't already know going into it. Like, I knew you were a pirate, I knew there was boat stuff.
It was like an obligation showing, really, of saying, you know, we've got Assassin's Creed, you know, here is our token nod to Assassin's Creed, it's CG. It was just the guy, like you say, looking kind of moody, a bit fey, broody, you're going to fight some man. Didn't really felt like it built out the plot. It didn't really build out any new features. It didn't show anything that made you go, good grief, it looks incredible on PS4 or Xbox One. You know, maybe they're saving that for Sony. I didn't think that was a great showing, and as Tim says, for Watch Dogs, exactly the same. You know, it was disappointing just to see CG again.
One of the things we remarked on, you were telling me how good Rayman Legends, which I haven't played much of, is, and I know that it is quite acclaimed, but it was originally billed as a Wii U game and subsequently gone multi-format. Have you been, you know, we've seen now EA and we've seen Ubi. Have you been surprised that there's been almost no mention of Wii U whatsoever?
Surprised? Not really, because I mean, we're hearing from developers all the time that they're not necessarily that interested in Wii U, or publishers are saying, you know, EA have come out and said we haven't got any games in development for Wii U. So I wasn't surprised. No, I mean, I think it's disappointing because as a Nintendo player back in the day, you know, they've got a lot of love for that company, a lot of love for their machines, but unfortunately, Wii U has got wider problems which would take a longer time to debate than we have here. So I'm not really surprised, but it's disappointing, I think.
Dan?
Yeah, I think that it almost felt like there was a subtext where they suggested that, the game's finally coming out, we know it's been delayed, almost suggesting like, because it was dragged down by having to do just the Wii U format almost. You know, it felt like that. And to be fair, those games are, you know, if you haven't got a Nintendo console, they're the closest you're getting to a Mario pure style 2D experience. and they're beautifully produced and like they're really well balanced games.
Were either of you surprised that they didn't show Beyond Good and Evil 2? Beyond Good and Evil, it seems to me like it's in a similar place to Mirror's Edge, and a lot of people talk quite loudly about it, but I query how many of them actually played it, because it didn't sell any copies.
I think that's an even tougher sell than Mirror's Edge. I mean, Mirror's Edge at least had a lot of kind of like notable sort of recognisable things in it in terms of it being an action game, whereas Beyond Good and Evil was one of those games that people are like, oh, I love Beyond Good and Evil. What was it about? Oh, it's about you sort of play with this pig and you photograph things and you're like, what?
She's a green lip photojournalist uncovering a conspiracy. They've got elite death squads and you've got a talking pig.
There's your elevator pitch.
Yeah. Come back! We're going to go with the Division this time? What?
I mean, I'm sure that must make an appearance at some stage because they've talked about it, but why not show it at E3?
Unless it's a PlayStation 4 exclusive.
It's supposedly a real pet project of Ubisoft Supremo, Yves Guillemot, who looked like you could fit him in just the palm of your hand when he was standing next to the presenter, Aisha Taylor.
He was in Game of Thrones, wasn't he, this season? He's a tiny little man.
Yves Guillemot's ability to take punchlines make us feel like we're operating on some sort of triumvirate of Ant and Dec style level of flow.
Yeah.
I feel like one of you is going to lurch in towards a hate crime at this point. So let's wrap up with what were your highlight and low light of the show, and then I'll ask you for a score as well. Dan, do you want to go first?
Yeah, overall score 7. That's 9 for the Division and 5 for the rest of it. Highlight was clearly the Division. Low light was, oh man, Rocksmith, because that's not of interest to me. That's probably a good product.
Product, Dan, you've changed.
Splinter Cell Blacklist, that was a very poor showing.
Oh, that was a poor showing, actually. We didn't even get a chance to discuss that. But, I mean, didn't show that game at all.
Yeah.
I mean,
I think, again, it's like an obligation thing. Like, it's coming out. There's loads of people who've worked on it and go, like, you can't just have your show and go, are you going to show our game at all?
But they didn't even show it. They just showed, like, a series of, like Matt was talking about, a series of, like, 24
There's
Star
a Blacklist,
Squares.
Sam. Okay, I'm there. There's another Blacklist. Get him, Sam. Okay, I will. I'm going to get him. What?
It is just like that if you play it. And highlight also the Division.
Yeah, definitely the Division. Low light. I actually think the low lights are probably the fact that they've got two such stellar games in Watch Dogs and Assassins. They didn't really show them off to their best ability. That may be for wider reasons, but
Score?
I'd give it a 7, but I'd say that the Division is most of that score.
Yeah, I'd go 6 with the same rationale. Like, the rest of it left me almost entirely cold. I think Assassins will be good, but you got to show it. And I went to the toilet during Just Dance, so can't comment on that.
You could say, Eve, the Division made it add up.
It's we've reached a dark new place. Stay with us though for the rest of the week. We'll be reporting back from the remaining press conferences and some video games.